Hello, fellow YouTubers, and welcome back to Power Up Gamers. I'm Driven D&D, the Disabled DM, and this is a video response to TIm Harper's 13 questions. So he has some very interesting questions that I felt were a bit too complex to just answer in a post, especially with there being 13 of them. So video response was the best way for me to go about answering them. So, and from my understanding is he has a college class that he is doing a paper on, and they allowed him to do it regarding RPGs. And that's why he's asking these questions, is to get feedback to use in his paper. So he asks is, can you please describe in detail any negative situations that came about in your life because you played RPGs? For example, were you ever bullied, belittled, made fun of, told you were going to hell because you played those games, etc.? Well, I never had much with the bullying or being made fun of for playing it. When I got bullied and made fun of, it was because of my disabilities. However, I have had some negative situations and regarding violent players getting upset, and I've had to deal a lot with the going to hell bit, or that those games were spiritually not moral. And some of those situations of dealing with my family, for example, that are all heavily Christian based, and for growing up, and until recently they didn't understand what RPGs were. They had got caught up in the 1980s scare that these games were satanic, taught witchcraft, etc. So for a long time I fought with my family over it. And it really built a wall between me and my family until recently. My family started doing things like murder mystery dinners, where they would go pay for a nice dinner and then act out a murder mystery. When they started doing this, that was my opening to explain that, aimed at pretty much all we do is the same thing they did. They a character, they don't use a script, and they act out what the character would say and do in that situation. And I explained to them that's all, except for instead of acting it out, we are sitting around telling each other what our characters would be doing and saying, and we use dice to determine what happens. So it's eased up a lot. They have a little bit of trouble understanding, but it started to come out. But for a long time, I wasn't allowed to play it in the house I lived in. They didn't really like the friends I was hanging out with who were playing it. As things of that nature. They haven't even fully understood yet the benefit side to playing it. which I talk about on my channel in one of the disabilities and RPOs. I believe it's episode 2 that covers some of the benefits of RPGs. And that kind of leads into the next question. What skills do you think you have personally improved upon by playing RPGs? Social skills. For a long time, I was a real loner, isolated, except for my group that I played with. Outside of that, I didn't interact. I didn't really communicate with people I didn't know because I was really self-conscious about my disabilities. I never really learned the concept of team growing up because I was a loner. So some of these skills I've improved upon. I've definitely improved upon communication, storytelling, deviated thinking, problem solving, just all these skills that we typically use in RPGs. I think I've improved on all of them. The next question, number 3, is who introduced you to RPGs and what was your first experience like playing them? Well, who introduced me to RPGs is, I've done a video on this and I actually have a twofold answer because my introduction wasn't typical. Typically, you're introduced to it through an actual RPG, such as Dungeons and Dragons, and that wasn't the case for me. My introduction actually started as far back as I can remember with my grandfather, who would often tell us make-believe stories, fairy tales, and he would always ask us during the story one of 2 questions. The first one being, what do you think this character should do in this situation? And the other question is, what would you do if you were in this situation? So I actually learned the role-playing side of it kind of before I even knew what RPGs were, because we would answer his questions as well as kids could. Then I get into my actual introduction around 8, and that was a friend of mine who was a little bit older, probably around 10 or 11, and whose family played the red box in D&D. And he wanted to play, and he's allowed to really play with them if it's kind of a grown-up thing. And so he got hold of one of the character sheets, and he made blank copy, just writing out what we would need to know on paper. And he, with a set of dice, the character sheets, and we played basically a gladiator setup. We were allowed like 1 magical item. We made our character see them, and then the winner took the loser's magical item and went on to the next round. And that was the whole thing. And we played like this probably 3-4 months before starting to expand outside of the arena. So that was kind of my first experience. I enjoyed it just because of the concept I could play this heroic person who didn't have to deal with all the things I dealt with being disabled. Or, so for me, it was kind of a way to know what it was to feel normal, which was really important to me at that time. My first experience running a game, that's a tough question because I've been GMing for so long that it's really hard to remember a lot of my earlier games because you're talking 25, 30 years ago. Oh, the first one I can really recall was I had a couple friends. I was a teenager, and I had set up this basic story. We were going to kill a dragon who was raiding a village. I definitely, looking back now, I don't think I did very good. I didn't give a lot of description. Almost the whole thing was a railroad, not a lot of player agency, not a lot of real role playing. It was more of the hack and slash type that you get from MMOs and video games. But I enjoyed being able to tell a story, even though it wasn't a very good story at that time. And that kind of intrigued me and kept me going over the years. He then asks a fifth question: what was it like designing your own system? And for me, I am gonna kind of clarify that because I've never really designed my own system from scratch. Usually what I use, take a standard system, almost always D&D, because that's where I had the most exposure to. And I homebrew some rules and content for it. So what, for me, what is it like homebrewing content, designing rules that work with the setting? It can be a challenge because you want to keep it balanced with all the other mechanics. You make sure by doing change to one rule, it doesn't break a bunch of the other rules, and that it works really well. So it can take a lot of time and patience to test these things out and tweak them just right. But it's also a lot of fun. It can add a very distinct flavor to your particular system or setting. And then he goes into was it like your own setting? This, for me, is the cream aim of the crop when it comes to RPGs. Is because I've never really used a setting or a module for more than a session or two. As kind of an introduction, I've always homebrewed stuff and the world or within the game. And there's no other feeling like it because everything you put in there is a piece of yourself, whether it's part of your creativity, imagination, inspiration from other people that you've taken in, and then you're pouring it back out into it. But the thing I really like most is you're not restricted by rules with your own setting. And you're only restricted by your own creativity and imagination. So anything can happen in your setting. And, and that's the key thing I love of with RPGs is anything can happen and you tell a good story. He then goes to ask question number 7. Why do you think tabletop RPGs are not known about by a good many people in the public? Well, I think this actually should be divided down because I think it depends a lot on located. It seems a lot more people inside of North America, the US, Canada know of RPGs and tabletop RPGs compared to other countries. And I think there's a couple reasons for this. The first one being the culture, Americans in particular, by nature, tend to be rebellious against being told what to do. So when this scare came up in the 1980s with Dungeons and Dragons being satanic, the Christian churches had a big outcry against it. There were government agencies basically saying this is leading to murders and violence. And Americans were basically being told, don't get involved with this, it's bad, it's evil, it's not beneficial. And Americans are kind of, if you tell us not to do something, we're going to do it to spite you. It's kind of that attitude that's been prevalent throughout American history. And still is pretty prevalent to this day. So I think that was a big influence in getting it known among North America. Now, other cultures aren't like that. And China, a lot of the Asian and Middle Eastern cultures, they're very traditionally obedient to authority and follow what they're told. Or historically, that's been the case. So for them, it never had that rebellious aspect. For those who knew of it, they played it because they liked telling the story, they liked the social interactions, but it never became a big outcry in culture. So I think the biggest factor as to why it's not known to some people. Another reason it's not really well known to people is there is a large community of folks who are disabled or who have special needs. And it's for a long time in tabletop RPG histories, there was no access to them for people who were deaf, blind, or had other special needs. And it's starting to change this as games being done in ASL. There's people doing YouTube who are starting to transcribe the videos. There's braille dice, etc. coming out. So they started to open it up to that community. Whereas before, that community was cut off and didn't know about it, couldn't participate if they did know. So those are the main reasons I think it's not known about. It's mostly culture and access capabilities. He then asks question number 8. What is an RPG and why are these types of games fun? Well, an RPG simply means a role-playing game. And that is a game where you take on the personality of the character you're playing. And whether it's in a video game format or whether it's tabletop RPG. And why are these types of games fun? Well, there's different reasons for different people. But I think the real reason that it's fun goes back to us as adults and teenagers and grown-ups. It's that it ties us back into our childhood when we all used to make pretend, we used to play make-believe, whether it was cops and robbers, house cowboys and Indians. And I think it really ties us back to that time when we were pretty innocent. We didn't have to worry about paying bills or how to survive. We just played fun and doing so. And I think that's the big reason we find these games fun. I think another reason is we get to tell stories that are just amazing, and we get to escape a kind of the reality of the world, at least temporarily, and shrug off our problems and do these heroic adventures. And it really gets of we can do pretty much anything, and if we really put our mind to it. So I think that's the basic reasons we find these games fun. He then asks if you were going to teach a new player how to play RPGs, how would you go about doing that? Well, the first thing I would do is explain really what is you're doing with an RPG, that you're getting together as a group or one-on-one and telling a story together. And I would relate it back to kids playing make-believe, because everyone understands that. Because as kids, it was our nature to do so. And then I would, after they kind of get the concept for that, before I even go into mechanics or how the system works, I cover kind of the role-playing side of it, and I'll give them a sample scenario something simple like you're hunting out in the forest and you twist your ankle, you fall down on a edge or a rocky path, and you see these creatures, and I would describe goblins, and they turn and they dry out rusty daggers and they move towards you menacingly. What would you do? And I kind of do this a couple times with little scenarios and get them kind of used to thinking as the character. And I would kind of guide them. Okay, so that's what you would do. Now, if you had the personality of your character that we came up with, how do you think they would respond? And I run this through till they're pretty comfortable with it. And then I go into, okay, I start explaining the mechanics such as rolling the dice to determine if you hit or miss. And then I just build up on it little bit by little bit, throwing basically one mechanic at them at a time and letting them use it a couple times to get at the hang of it before I add the next. So that's kind of how I teach new players, especially someone who's never played a video game or any type of RPG. Now, if they play video games like MMOs, like World of Warcraft, it's a little bit easier to teach them, but a little bit faster to pick up on things. But it's the same basic format that I use. What age group do you think plays these games more than other age groups? I really don't think there's a specific age group that plays it more. I do think it is rather spread among maybe the 25 to, I would say, 50-ish age range, because we grew up during the time that it was being outcried against as being non-beneficial, or for Dungeons and Dragons. And now, so I think it's widespread for that kind. Now, video games, collectible card RPGs such as Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, World of Warcraft, I think those, even though they do have older players, I think those are really among the late teenagers. So I would say maybe the 15 to 25 age range is more interested in that set of RPGs. What overall benefits do you think a person that plays RPGs has that perhaps a non-gamer wouldn't have or would have less of? There's a lot of benefits that I've already talked about that I would personally would have had less of if I hadn't played RPGs. However, with that being said, I don't think necessarily that you have to play an RPG to practice these different benefits or skills that uh, will give you the same benefits. So dividing it up as a person that plays RPGs or a gamer versus a non-gamer, I don't think it's quite adequate. I would say it's more along the lines of taking someone who's having the same life experience except for this one thing and comparing it that way. Now, for that kind of scenario where you've had basically the same life experiences except for one person plays an RPG and the other doesn't, I think there is some benefits such as increased ability to communicate, creative, definitely teamwork and collaboration